Hi, my name is Jeff Bauer. I'll be presenting on utilitarianism and accounting. First, utilitarianism, as described by John Stuart Mill, is often used in ethical decision making. John Stuart Mill was born in 1806 in London. As a boy, his father taught him about economics and philosophy and politics. By the age of 8, John Stuart Mill started studying philosophy from Greek authors such as Plato, and by the age of 10 he was actually able to read in the original text in Greek from those philosophers. As his thirst for knowledge grew, he started writing articles on various subjects until in his later teen years to his first adult time period he actually was getting articles published in newspapers. For his career, John Stuart Mill was a clerk for the British East India Company and worked there most of his life. After retiring, he published a series of books, and this is what he became famous and renowned for, and one of those books was on utilitarianism. Utilitarianism basically means that every action or decision should be determined by how much good it can bring. In other words, the most good it can do to the most people is better. Utilitarianism is a type of consequentialist philosophy, which means as long as the consequence is good or outweighs the cost, then it should be pursued and looked for. This ethical approach applies to many fields. I think accounting and business especially uses this. I would think that it uses it more in the auditing field, where it audits financial statements. Obviously, financial statements affect a lot of people, a lot of stakeholders, and the more transparent and honest that accountants can make those financial statements, the more value, the more good they can do for a lot more people than just focusing on trying to do other approaches. Ethics in accounting, obviously accountants have to be very ethical. The AICPA has created a code of conduct that requires accountants who have licenses to be ethical, to be honest, have integrity, have independence. And accountants come across ethical crossroads pretty much every day, in every decision they make, between clients or coworkers, the public. And utilitarianism is just one aid that accountants can use in making these difficult decisions. The problem is, with accountancy, it is a service profession, and the entire premise of accountancy basically stands on trust from the public, and if that trust is ever broken, then the profession of accountancy will cease to exist. There's some possible problems with utilitarianism. First of all, accountants are basically the sole judge of what's going to result in the most good for the most people. Like I said, with financial statements, they decide which things are wrong, which things are okay. Materiality comes into play, and if they choose to do something unethical, it can have some pretty catastrophic consequences. So with their judgment, who knows where they grew up, what type of upbringing they had, if they, are honest people, have integrity. Another possible problem with this type of approach is selfish justification. I think a good example of this is with Enron and Arthur Andersen. I would think, even probably thought they were using the utilitarian approach to being ethical and using some of the accounting practices they did. I think that they thought they were doing good for the most amount of people. The problem is the scope of the people they were trying to help was too small. They weren't thinking of others outside of the business. They were just thinking of themselves. So it can be a justification problem. Also, this utilitarian approach is a utopian philosophy, which means if we lived in a perfect society, this approach would actually probably work almost all the time. The problem is we don't live in a society like that. It's almost impossible, and so oftentimes we have to, use a combination of utilitarianism and maybe egoism, maybe not, maybe dialectical approaches would be good. Anyway, it's pretty much impossible to use this in every situation. In conclusion, John Stuart Mill was a 19th century philosopher. Accountants use his philosophy, which is utilitarianism, to be ethical, making decisions. Sometimes it's hard to decide between a right and a right, or right and a wrong. This can help them. The problem is utilitarianism isn't always the best choice. Like I said, accountancy and business use utilitarianism as a conduit to making decisions, but sometimes it's not always the best choice. Thank you.